Welcome to my lecture on electromagnetic fields. This unit has been developed specifically for you as feng shui consultants to gain an understanding of the complexities of electromagnetic field testing, whilst at the same time being able to provide simple techniques on how to reduce the client's exposure to these fields. Now, the reality is when we're doing feng shui consulting, we're rearranging furniture and providing recommendations to clients. But the last thing we want to do is to put the client in a situation where we make their health significantly worse. We now know, based on the scientific literature, that exposure to AC magnetic fields and radio frequencies used in wireless technology are associated with an increased risk of certain types of cancers and other health symptoms like headache and fatigue and sleep-related problems. We know that electromagnetic fields can affect melatonin, which is the body's most potent antioxidant free radical scavenger and essential also for immune response. So what I want to do in this lecture is to provide you with some basic information on what electromagnetic fields are and how to measure a particular field that we refer to as AC magnetic fields. Let's begin. Electromagnetic radiation is simply a wave. So as you can see here in the diagram, a wavelength is the distance between the crest of one wave to the next. Frequency is the number of waves that pass a given point every second, and the unit of measurement we use for this is Hertz. Named after, of course, Heinrich Hertz, it's a unit of frequency and is measured in cycles per second. For example, if 10 wavelengths passed per second, that would be referred to as 10 Hertz. In fact, if you have a look at your electricity bill, you'll notice how many kilohertz of energy that you used in the last quarter. The body emits its own electromagnetic waves. In fact, with the brain, we use an EEG or an electroencephalogram in order to measure brain waves. We use an ECG, electrocardiogram, to measure heart waves or the cyanodes in the heart. We know that at certain types of sleep and meditation that we emit different types of frequencies in our brain, and you can see that there in the diagram. And you are actually officially pronounced dead when there are no more brain waves in your body emitted. The Earth also has her own frequencies, which I'll mention shortly, including the Earth's magnetic field. The electromagnetic spectrum in this diagram is really important for you to have a good understanding because it shows you the type of electromagnetic fields that we're bathed on in the planet. There are natural sources of electromagnetic fields, and they include the sun's energy, infrared, which is heat, as well as visible light, which enables us to see our world. But we also have the Earth's magnetic field, which is a DC magnetic field, which enables navigation, used as navigation by animals and fish to navigate their way across the planet, for example. We have the Schumann resonance, which is created from thunderstorm activity occurring at any given point on the Earth, and that creates a hertz of about 7.83, although that can vary up to 15 hertz, for example. And all of these frequencies are what we've evolved on over millennia since we've been here on this planet. However, recently, particularly in the last 200 years, we've introduced electricity into our homes, and in the last 10 years we've introduced a plethora of wireless technologies that we've never introduced before into our own home. And this has brought about terms like digital dementia, like Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, and all these new words into our vocabulary because of our voracious appetite for these wireless technologies. In fact, over 6 billion mobile phone users exist on the planet to date, and no doubt that is expanding exponentially. With the electromagnetic spectrum, what you need to know is that there are variances in terms of the electromagnetic fields. We start here with the extra low frequency band, and this is anything up to 3 kilohertz or 3000 hertz. You can see here that includes all of your building wiring and appliances because, as I mentioned, 50 hertz is the frequency that we use in our building wiring and our appliances. So 50 wavelengths pass per second, and this is an alternating current field, which is what I'll talk about in a moment. This also includes, of course, our power lines, our substations, our transformers on our power lines, all our building wiring, and all our appliances use 50 hertz. In the radio frequency band, this is what we refer to and use in wireless technologies and telecommunications. This includes things like radio, digital radio, digital television, radar used in military bases or seaports, or even at airports use radar. We also use radar cameras for speed, for example, and in weather, being able to calculate what's going on with our weather. In our homes, our radio frequencies are introduced through things like wireless routers. Anything that connects to the internet is wireless. Bluetooth, mobile phones, wireless baby monitors, for example. Smart meters have wireless components now, of course, to them. Cordless phones, etc. So all your wireless technologies fits into this frequency of what we call the radio frequency band. And if you look closely, you'll notice it's broken up into radio waves and microwaves. Much of the frequency used in telecommunications uses the microwave band. As you move up the electromagnetic spectrum, we have infrared, which is basically the heat that we get from the sun and from other people. It's that infrared heat. Then we get into the visible spectrum, which is that shaded bit there in the middle. And it forms such a small part of all the electromagnetic radiation that we're exposed to on the planet. And yet this is what enables us to see the objects around us, the visible light. And we know, of course, visible light is made up of the various colours of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, in that order. Red having less wavelengths passed per second, and violet having more wavelengths passed per second as you go up the spectrum, which is why we say violet has a high frequency. And then, of course, we get on to X-rays. X-rays, from this moment onwards, from UV onwards, is what we call ionising radiation, where it has the ability to ionise the DNA and increase the risk of cancer. X-rays, of course, have very useful purposes in medical diagnoses, but of course too many X-rays and mammograms, for example, were shown to cause cancers. And interesting, in the 1950s, an important doctor, Dr. Alice Stewart, identified that women who were X-rayed whilst they were pregnant, the incidence of them having a child with developing childhood leukemia by the age of 7 doubled. So she was able to show that X-raying pregnant women was not a good idea. Gamma rays, of course, come from any form of nuclear technology and fusion and fission. Of course, that has very harmful effects on the human body, as we realise with Hiroshima and a lot of the nuclear testing that's happened on this planet. And of course, after that, we actually have cosmic radiation, which is from the explosion of galaxies and stars in the sky. So when a planet explodes, it emits huge amounts of cosmic rays, which are incredibly harmful, and it means that unless a planet has an ionosphere around it to protect it from the cosmic rays, it's going to prevent bacteria growing on the planet. And that's why Earth is sustaining life, is because it has water and because it has a protective atmosphere that protects it from the high cosmic rays. Now, it's interesting to note that when you fly above 30,000 feet, that you're going to be exposed to much higher levels of cosmic radiation, and this is why they suspect flight crew, particularly women, have higher rates of infertility because of their exposure to these particles as they fly high up in the atmosphere. So let's talk about DC versus AC fields, and I don't want to get too technical here. Direct current electromagnetic fields exist in nature, such as the Earth's magnetic field, and all species on the planet have evolved based on the Earth's magnetic field, and as I mentioned, use it for navigation, particularly fish, dolphins, whales, birds, bees, etc. Many of these animals have magnetite, which enables them to use the Earth's magnetic field for directions. The movement of electrons in direct current only moves one way. This is very different to AC magnetic fields, which we use in our building wiring and our appliances. AC magnetic fields and radio frequency electromagnetic energy used in wireless technologies have been classified as Group 2B, possibly carcinogenic to humans, by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which are a division of the World Health Organization. And that was classified in 2002 for magnetic fields and 2011 for radio frequencies in wireless technology. So whilst there are lots of different fields, which I mentioned in the electromagnetic spectrum, when you look at the scientific literature, the two fields that keep coming up in the scientific literature for adverse health effects concerns are AC magnetic fields, which you'll find in the extra low frequency section of the electromagnetic spectrum because it uses 50 hertz, it's below 3 kilohertz. and radio frequencies used in wireless technologies. So they're the two fields that building biologists will measure specifically because there's a lot of information on them and because of adverse health effects. Alternating fields, electromagnetic fields, exist only where there is man-made electricity. So this isn't something you naturally see in nature. The movement of the electrons flows in one direction and then reverses and flows in the opposing direction. So it's doing this all the time. We know our household wiring and all of our appliances use a 50 Hertz power supply. 50 Hertz means 50 wavelengths are passing per second, and it's doing this, alternating back and forth in fractions of a second many, many times. So this is anything appliance that's hooked into the power is going to create what we call these, it's using this 50 Hertz field. This creates an expansion of the magnetic field, it moving in one direction, and then a collapse and expansion of the opposite polarity magnetic field, which is all gobbledygook for feng shui, and you don't need to know that detail, but it just gives you an idea of the foundations. And this is how AC fields induce small electrical currents in nearby conductive objects, including people, because we're mainly water. So electric fields are going to be attracted to us all the time, which is why we can get electrocuted. This is very different to DC fields like the Earth's magnetic field, which only flows in one direction. So what you need to know as feng shui consultants is the difference between electric and magnetic fields. So firstly, electric and magnetic fields sit in the extra low frequency band of the electromagnetic spectrum because they use 50 Hertz. Again, our building wiring and all of our appliances use a 50 Hertz power supply, 50 wavelengths passing per second. This type of electricity creates two types of fields. An electric field, which is created from voltage, which is electricity under pressure, and magnetic fields. Magnetic fields are created as a result of current. And current, like a current in water, it's the movement. So it's the movement of electrons along a conductor that creates the magnetic field. So electric field is created from voltage, electricity under the pressure. Magnetic fields, in contrast, are created from current, where electrons are flowing. So the difference is, with electric fields, is an appliance that's put in the power point, turned on at the power point, but it's not in use. So it might be a bedside table lamp, you've plugged it into the power point, it's on at the power point, but the lamp isn't lighting. It's creating, and you can measure an electric field around the wire as well as the light, because it's got voltage and creating electricity under pressure. When you turn that light on, the electrons will start moving through the conductor and creating a magnetic field as well. So appliances that are on, such as a bedside lamp table that's lighting, it will be creating both an electric field and a magnetic field. So just to give you an idea of the differences between the fields, remember electric and magnetic fields are created as a result of using the 50 Hertz power supply. Every appliance that's hooked into the power point is going to emit electric field, and when it's in use, it will also emit a magnetic field. So sources of electric fields are any appliances that are plugged in at the wall and turned on at the power point, even though they may not be in use. In contrast, magnetic fields are created when the appliance is on. So the electric blanket has to be heating, the oven has to be heating, the motor has to be kicking into cooling the fridge for the magnetic field to be created. For example, what others? Toasters, the toaster has to be actually toasting the bread in order to create a magnetic field. The kettle has to be actually heating the water in order to create a magnetic field. How do we measure electric fields? Well, we measure them in volts per metre, and we use what's referred to. There are many devices we can use to measure this, from a multimeter, etc., which I'll go into in a moment. How do we measure magnetic fields? Well, the unit of measurement is milligauss or Teslas. In Australia and England, we tend to say milligauss. In Europe, they refer to it as micro or nano Teslas, and that's the unit of measurements. The unit of measurement for electric fields is volts per metre. Electric fields are very easily influenced by their surroundings. So just having trees, for example, if you have a power line and then trees before it hits your house, those trees, because they contain water within them, will actually absorb a lot of that electric field. So, whereas magnetic fields will not be influenced by things around them. The magnetic field coming from the power line will go straight through the tree and just drop off with distance. Penetration. Electric fields are attracted to anything that can conduct electricity, including animals, humans, metal, of course, in its attempt to be grounded, because the electric field constantly wants to be grounded, and you are a good way to do that because you're primarily water. The magnetic field can penetrate most objects, bricks, pretty much every building material, bricks, metal, mortar, marble, stone, etc. So it does not reduce or attenuate the field. Effects. Exposures to high forms of electrical fields are suspected to cause electromagnetic hypersensitivity, which I cover in a different video. Exposures to magnetic fields are potentially harmful to the body because of their ability to cause DNA fragmentation and reduce melatonin levels, which I discuss in a different lecture. How do we shield against electric fields? Well, they're actually quite easy to shield. Simply having plants in your front garden between the source of exposure, like a power line, and the house can significantly reduce the exposure. Any form of shielding techniques, metal, flex, or particular shielding materials in curtains will also help to deflect that. Shielding from magnetic fields is almost impossible, and that's a problem if you live, say for example, in a home where you've got tram lines immediately in front of you, you're on a second story, your bedroom is on a second floor, you literally are a metre or two away from a tram line. That's going to emit high magnetic fields, and there's pretty much nothing you can do except to move out of that front bedroom and get to the back, because as you double the distance away from the tram line, you reduce your exposure by 75%. Very important that you are not sleeping in high magnetic fields. So unfortunately, magnetic fields you can't shield for. There is one material that can be used called mu metal, Mu metal, but it's incredibly expensive and really not viable for most people to be able to use. Tests. How do we test electric fields? Well, there's several devices we can use to test electric fields, but as feng shui consultants, you don't need to do this. In fact, even a lot of the building biologists, I'd suggest, don't do this, because we all know that from the source, such as your wiring or the appliance, the electric field will always come out 1.2 metres approximately. So if we know, based on the fact that the light switch is on the wall there, the wiring is going to be there, so therefore the electric field will come out 1.2 metres. Now, most people who don't have any symptoms are not going to have any problems with electric fields, so I don't freak out about that, and I don't get my clients to freak out about it. The only time it becomes important is if someone has electromagnetic hypersensitivity, in which case they will naturally, many of them naturally and intuitively will move their bed to the middle of the room and say, I don't know why, but I can only sleep there. And lo and behold, they're at least 1.2 metres away from the wall where the wiring is creating that electric field. Personally, as I said, I don't look at this. Even in my own home, if there's wiring in the wall, you know, we've had electricity for over 200 years now, and its impact on human health is unlikely to be an issue unless someone is really highly sensitive, such as with electromagnetic hypersensitivity. So I don't address this in most audits unless they have this condition. What do building biologists do to measure electric fields? Well, there's many things you can do. There are many devices. We have what we call a tri-field meter here, and this measures electrical fields. But as I said, there's no point measuring them if you know that it's already going to come out 1.2 metres. So if there's an appliance on the floor or a toaster, then the electric field will come out 1.2 metres from the toaster, or from the building wiring, or from the power cord, or from the fridge, or from any appliance. It'll come out 1.2 metres. So therefore, in terms of guidance for people with electrical sensitivity, I strongly suggest you get a building biologist involved. Another way we measure electrical fields is with a multimeter. And this is something that a lot of electricians will use in their work in terms of identifying electric fields, although they're not really seeing that as a potential source of harm. The most effective way to measure electric fields is actually body voltage, but it's really complicated because you need a multimeter. You then need to earth the multimeter, set up a circuit where the client holds the rod connected to the multimeter and the earth rod, and then identify body voltage by moving them in and out of various fields. That's really complicated and something that you will not be doing as feng shui consultants. In contrast, the magnetic field can be easily measured with what we call a Gauss meter. GAUSS meter. And there are many meters on the market, and you get what you pay for. So here we have a Gauss meter. It's approximately $120. But unless you know what you're looking for, this only measures in one axis. So basically you have to hold the meter like this, and then hold it up at an angle, and then up and down in the X, Y, and Z axis. Get all those readings in that spot, times them all, and square root it, and then you get an overall reading for this spot. So often people go out and buy cheap meters and then go, oh, I don't have a problem on my bedroom for magnetic fields from the bedside lamp or from the electric blanket, when they don't realise that this is underestimating the levels because it's a single axis Gauss meter. You don't want to buy a single axis one. You want a 3-axis digital Gauss meter. Now you have 3-axis digital Gauss meters that we sell at the college, the ozone radiation finders. And basically what I love about it is it's so simple. The green means it's up to 2.5 milligauss. The green and orange means it's going up to 8 milligauss. Anything above 8 milligauss will have all 3 lights on, including the red one, which means it's a warning that is too high. It also comes in a small pocket size, which is actually my favourite because I keep it in my bag to check for AC magnetic fields. Now, building biologists won't use equipment like this because it's too simplified, and what they want is the exact reading in to 2 decimal places. So the instruments that building biologists will use to assess AC magnetic fields is something like this. This is called an FM Fauser, and it provides, it measures it in nanoteslas, so we divide it by 100 to get milligauss, and it gives us a digital reading within 2 decimal places. Now this starts at about $1,400. So as a feng shui consultant, really not required to do that. Just simply using a simple radiation finder and knowing what the lights mean is all you need. These are about $60 for the small one and $70 for the large one. So this is what a building biologist will use because it can measure body voltage, electric and magnetic fields, and it provides a digital reading, and it's a 3-axis digital Gauss meter. So very effective, especially when we're dealing with clients that potentially could be going to VCAT or involved in a court of law. Another way to measure is dowsing rods. Now you learn this in the geobiology subject, you learn to use dowsing rods. Now, the problem with this is that human error is very high and it's not very technical. Great to pick up geopathic stress, but if you're not feeling well or feeling emotional or not well hydrated, etc., then these are not going to be very useful. Some people swear by these to measure electric fields and magnetic fields, but quite frankly, the error rate is likely to be really high. And why would you bother when there are actually instruments, technical instruments available to be able to measure the fields? So just to recap, as a feng shui consultant, our expectations are that you're going to identify AC magnetic fields in the environment, because you can do that simply with these radiation finders. So let's have a look at where AC magnetic fields are in the home. The external sources are things like high voltage transmission lines, and the research on that came out in 1979 by 2 engineers. They were 2 researchers, Wertheimer and Leeper, and what they did is have a look at children with leukemia. They went to all their homes and noticed that many of them lived near high voltage transmission lines. They got an engineer involved to develop a device, a Gauss meter, to measure the field, and they noticed that if these children were brought up in the first 15 years of their life within a certain distance from the high voltage transmission lines with exposures of 3 or 4 milligauss, that their levels of childhood leukemia doubled. Since then, there's been a plethora of research on exposures to high voltage transmission lines, and as a result of this, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified AC magnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic. That was as a result of 2 really important reviews by Album and Greenland in the year 2000, which showed that anything above 3 milligauss was associated with a doubling the incidence of childhood leukemia. Now, why is that important? Because a meter panel or a smart meter will emit up to 500 or more milligauss. So anything above 3 milligauss is considered to be a problem, especially in children and infants who are growing and who are undergoing rapid cell division. In a home where you're going to get high levels of magnetic fields, it's anything that draws a lot of current. These are things like your meter panel and your smart meter. They are your fridge when the fridge is cooling. And they include things like your digital clock radio that can emit very high magnetic fields, which drops off quickly with distance, which is why your digital clock radio should be on the other side of your room, away from your bed head. Electric blankets can emit very high magnetic fields and they're close to you. So these are where you need to, and the inverter. If someone has solar panels, the inverter that converts DC sun energy to AC electrical energy can emit very high magnetic fields. So they're the main ones that can emit high fields that you need to be mindful of where they might be in the home when you're doing a field trip. But the most important thing about testing for AC magnetic fields is don't test every appliance, because every appliance that's in use is going to be a problem. Do it in your house but not your clients. What I really want you to focus on is where do the occupants spend time in this home, and it's going to be their bed, where they spend 20 years of their life, apparently, is the average, over a period of 80 years. Their favourite couch, the bench top where they're preparing food or washing dishes, and the office or study or where they do work. So they're the main areas that you must test as part of the subject in Healthy Home in order to make sure. So you're going to get your Gauss meter, you're going to turn it on, and then you're going to ask the client, in this bedroom, at night time when you're lying in bed, are there any appliances on? And most of the time people will say no. It's because you're going to replicate whatever is normal for them. And then you're going to put this against the bed head and measure the magnetic field. And then you're going to put it at their bed head, then at their middle of the body, and then at their feet, just to check that the fields aren't high. Sometimes you come across anomalies where you can't see why it's high, and lo and behold, in older homes you can find high levels coming from under the floor where there's metal pipes and the electricity has been earthed to the pipes, creating high magnetic fields on the floor. So as you bring this down, it's going to go into the orange and the red section. If it's coming from above, as you move it up, it's going to go orange-red if there's a source of magnetic fields. And often that will be something like a fan that's in use, where the motor is in the fan creating a hot spot. And that's particularly a problem upstairs. If you've got fans below that are on, upstairs it's going to create high AC magnetic field spots in the area above. So you want to make sure children aren't spending time on the floor immediately above ceiling fans or anything with a motor in it. So you only use this in areas where they spend time. You check it on their pillow, on their favourite couch, on their desk, or where they're working or studying, and of course where they're preparing food and in the kitchen, washing dishes, for example. Just check. With the kitchen, be mindful, make sure the dishwasher is on if it's close by, because it can emit a high field in some cases. So you want to make sure that you're replicating that when you're actually doing the testing. Exposure standards for AC magnetic fields by ICNIRP, the International Commission for Non-Ionising Radiation Protection, which is what Australia adopts, says anything above 2,000 milligauss is a problem, which is crazy in light of the fact that the research by Wertheim and Leeper on childhood leukemia showed anything above 3 milligauss was a problem. As a result of this, the Bioinitiative report, which is a really important report, if you don't read anything else on electromagnetic fields apart from my book, please have a look at the summary of the Bioinitiative report, which provides good evidence of the adverse health effects associated with magnetic fields. Switzerland, maximum is 10 milligauss, and the building biology standards state it should be less than 2 milligauss for a living room, so be on green, and ideally in a bedroom less than 0.2 milligauss. This device won't allow you to know if it's what it is below 2 milligauss because it only goes up to 2.5. But with, of course, a digital Gauss meter, a building biologist will need to assess the bedrooms to make sure that it's at least below around 0.2 or less milligauss. So let's go on to the other frequency. So the first one, as I mentioned, was AC magnetic fields, and that's the one that you're going to be testing as a feng shui consultant. The other fields, electric fields and radio frequencies used in wireless technology, is not taught in this subject. We spend an entire year on that alone, and I just want to talk to you about why it's so complicated and why we don't teach you as feng shui consultants. If, however, you're interested in this topic, then you may wish to do the electricity fundamentals and electrobiology subjects here at the college, which is part of the building biology course, to add that bow to your professionalism as a feng shui consultant. So the sources of radio frequencies include mobile phone towers, they include radar from military, airports, seaports, traffic and weather control, Tetra, which is used in the emergency services like the police force and by ambulance industry, as well as digital television and digital and radio towers. Internal sources of radio frequency electromagnetic energy include mobile phones and cordless phones. They also include smart meters that have a radio frequency component, and all your wireless devices. So anything that is wireless baby monitors, your router. Router will be one of the highest sources of radio frequencies in the house, which is why it's so critical that it's not in a bedroom or in a study or in an office or anywhere where you spend time, because it beams high levels of radio frequency energy 24 hours a day. Laptops, iPads, iPods, anything that connects wirelessly to the internet is going to emit radio frequencies. Fitness trackers, printers, fax. In fact, some of those printers can emit very high radio frequency energy, and you only have to walk in the room with the high frequency meter and it just goes off. Fax machines, photocopiers, hearing devices can emit high RF, and of course paging systems. So how do we measure radio frequencies? And this is something you're not going to be doing as a feng shui consultant, but this is something that a building biologist will do. There are two devices we use to measure radio frequencies. This is a high frequency meter. It starts at around $2,000. Now, it's very different to a digital Gauss meter, because as you go up the electromagnetic spectrum, the electric and magnetic field combine. So therefore, the instrument you use to measure radio frequencies has to be different to the one you measured for magnetic fields. This is a directional meter, so the antenna is a really important part of the meter, and where I point it is where I'm picking up the waves that are coming into this direction. So it's time consuming to do electromagnetic field testing for wireless, because you literally have to stand still, wait, look at the readings, and then move slowly around the room in this direction, in the X, Y, and Z axis. So it's time consuming. Also, the issue with this is you need to have a good understanding of building materials, because anything that's metal, including foil, insulation and sarking in the roof, steel frames, concrete slabs and metal roofs, what they will do is when you have internal sources of radio frequencies, it will go towards these metal building materials and reflect back. So you could be pointing this towards a wall that has no source of radio frequencies, and it will be emitting high levels of radio frequencies because it's reflecting off what's inside the wall coming out. Mirrors are another good example because they have a metal backing. You'll often find when you're pointing towards a mirror, it emits high fields because it's reflecting something else from within the room bouncing off the mirror. Now, because you need to have a good understanding of building materials and the way in which they can influence radio frequencies, this is part of the reason why we don't teach this in the Healthy Home subject. But I want you to get a good understanding of how complicated this field is in order to make sure that you refer them on to a building biologist in the event you suspect that this is a problem in the home. Another meter we use to check for radio frequencies is a omnidirectional one. So this doesn't have an antenna. It's similar to your Gauss meter insofar as it's measuring in the X, Y, and Z axis. But the problem with this is we don't know where the source is coming from. And that's why that other meter is so valuable, because when we point it out the window towards a mobile phone tower, we're going, that's where the radio frequency is coming from. Whereas this just tells us what's happening in this spot, a bit like your Gauss meter. So we can turn it on and it measures in radio frequencies. This is around 600, but it's not that useful except to say what's happening right now in this spot. It doesn't tell us where it's coming from. If we use the other meter and point it in this spot to another direction, its levels could be 10 times higher what's here because it's telling us where it's coming from. So this is a very limited device, not very useful for EMF testing for radio frequencies, but it does give us an idea of what's happening in that particular location. The exposure standards for radio frequencies are completely inadequate in Australia, and they're complicated. So as you can see on this diagram, depending on which frequency we're talking about GSM 900 megahertz frequencies, which are used by some telecommunication carriers, or 1800 megahertz or 2100 megahertz. Whether you've got Vodafone, Telstra or Optus, they use different frequencies for their mobile telecommunications. So therefore, the frequency will vary. The exposure standards will vary from 4.5 million microwatts per square metre right up until 10 million microwatts per square metre. Now, what does all that mean? What it means is other countries are far more stricter in the level of radiation that comes from their phone and from their phone towers. And this is something that you need to be mindful of, that our standards are completely inadequate and are not health-based standards. They do not take into consideration low-level exposures over a very long period of time. So the building biology standard for radio frequencies, outdoor is a maximum of 10 and indoor is no more than 1 microwatt ideally. But if you have any form of internal sources of radio frequencies like cordless phones, you're going to exceed that by a huge margin. The Bioinitiative report stated that it shouldn't be more than 1,000 microwatts and children shouldn't be exposed to more than 6 microwatts, 3 to 6 microwatts per square metre. So you can see when you compare it to the Australian standards, the standards in Australia are pitiful, and as I mentioned, they are not health-based standards. In fact, France, Russia, Italy, China, Israel, Switzerland, Bulgaria, many countries have exposure limits that are 100 times lower than what we find here in Australia. So the standards for radio frequency electromagnetic energy are based on short-term immediate health effects based on tissue heating, which is completely inadequate because there's a lot of evidence now to show that the exposure to radio frequencies doesn't have to heat tissues before it causes harm. In fact, we now know that radio frequencies increase free radical damage in the cell, and this can cause DNA strand breaks and indirectly cause and increase the risk of things like brain tumours. The standards do not take into consideration long-term exposures to low non-thermal levels, despite the fact that growing evidence indicates that this could cause problems. So what do we do about all of this about electromagnetic fields? And the simple solution is distance. This is referred to as the inverse square law. And basically it states, as you double the distance away from the source, you effectively reduce your exposure by 75%. So having a look at this diagram, you can see the woman. She's exposed, she's standing there in front of a source of radio frequencies, and then as she doubles the distance again from the number 2 to the number 4 area, she reduces it by 75% again. So each time you double the distance, you reduce your exposure by 75%. And that's the key to addressing electromagnetic field issues. Distance is the key. So keep appliances away from where you spend time. Bedrooms are the most important because we spend so much time. Children could be spending 15 hours a day or more, especially infants, sleeping in their cots. So you don't want cots up against ovens and fridges or anything that draws a lot of current. You want to make sure it's certainly not a meter panel or a smart meter. So keep appliances at least 1 metre away from where you spend a lot of time. Your bed, your study, your desk, your kitchen bench, for example, ideally. Other things like with your kitchen bench, if you've got your sink and the dishwasher is underneath it, simply don't use your dishwasher until after you've prepared your food. Put the dishwasher on at night time when you go to bed, and then it's not a problem at all. Wireless devices should be avoided ideally. Hardwired cabled options are always a better option because they're not using radio frequencies. However, if someone insists on using wireless devices like routers to get internet connectivity, please turn it off when it's not in use, and especially at night time because it's designed to beam across the entire house, sometimes into your neighbour's home, the backyard, etc. When you buy your router, the manufacturer sets it at the high setting. So therefore, a good thing to do is to get onto the manufacturer's website, get the code of your router, put it in and power it down by more than 95%. So it's only emitting radio frequencies in a small area where you want to get internet connectivity. The second thing you need to do about your routers if you use wireless connections is to always switch it off when it's not in use, especially at night time, so it's not interfering with your circadian rhythm and with melatonin levels. Printers and photocopies, etc. should be wireless, or I would turn the wireless component off the printer. It can emit very high levels. Cordless phones, again, a real problem. They emit radio frequencies 24 hours a day, even when you're not making a phone call. In fact, cordless phones were shown to increase the rate of brain tumour gliomas and acoustic neuromas even more so than mobile phones, because we often spend more time on them thinking that they're safe. When it comes to wiring a home, a building biologist can educate your client about how to reduce their exposure to electric fields, magnetic fields and radio frequencies. Metal window or window awnings, if you've got radiation coming from mobile phone towers, the building biologist can assess it and then provide recommendations as to the type of window curtains or shielded fabrics that can be used to reduce exposure. Demand switches can also be used to reduce exposure from the electric fields. For clients with electromagnetic sensitivities, demand switches can be very useful. Shielding is a last resort. So shielded fabrics, shielded paints should be used as a very last resort, because they do not get rid of the field completely and they do not address the problem. So it's rare that I recommend shielding, but only after all other avenues cannot be addressed. Unless the device creates a distance between you and the source of exposure, it is unlikely to do anything in reducing your exposures to electromagnetic fields. So people ask me all the time, what about salt lamps? Salt lamps don't do anything for electromagnetic fields. What about device? I've got this pendant that helps me with the field. What a lot of rubbish that is. It doesn't do anything. When we measure these fields, it does nothing to the reducing the exposure to the strength of the field, but give you a false sense of security. Some people get things that they plug into their PowerPoints to reduce their exposure to geopathic stress and electromagnetic fields. All of these devices have been shown to be, well, they don't reduce the levels. So how ethically could I possibly recommend people use them when they make no difference on our meters? The last thing I want to talk about before I finish is in mobile phones. Mobile phones and cell phones are becoming such an intricate part of our lifestyle. I can't even imagine my life without my cell phone. Running the college and not being stuck to an office and being able to move around is fantastic. However, distance is the key. So whenever I can, instead of making a phone call on my mobile, I'll always use my corded phone in my office or home. If I have to use my mobile phone, I'll always use an earpiece, because I'm reducing my exposure to the radiation from the antenna, which is in the mobile phone. The earpiece will reduce it by at least 90%. If you haven't got an earpiece, then texting is always better, because you're only exposing your hands, which don't have any vital organs, to the radiation rather than your body and your head. Loudspeaker again is useful, because you're keeping anything that keeps that antenna away from your head is really important. And in fact, if you read the guidelines of your mobile phone, the telecommunications industry send out warnings regularly never to put this device near your person or your head, because of the level of radiation that you will be exposed to. Another one about using mobile phone is only use it in good reception areas. Excuse me. We suspect that farmers have higher incidences of adverse health effects from mobile phones, because they're often in very poor signal areas. So as a result of this, the level of the strength of the field is much higher. The level of radiation is much higher from a phone if there's hardly any bars on the window. So please check that before you make a call. Make sure the signal strength is good, that there's a maximum amount of bars, so the phone isn't working as hard to get a signal. Another point I want to make is that when you're in a car or a bus or tram or any form of metal carriage, when you use it, it's going to be bouncing those radio frequencies back in. So public transport can expose you to very high levels, and if you're sensitive, you'll often find people with electromagnetic sensitivity cannot use those forms of public transport because of the level of radiation that occur when people are using their phones in them. So as you know, building biologist encompasses a huge array of different fields, from electromagnetic fields to mould, indoor air quality, drinking water, building healthy homes, etc. We liaise with a lot of practitioners, including feng shui consultants, plumbers, builders, electricians, mould remediators, doctors, naturopaths, etc. Very exciting, the work that we do. For more information about electromagnetic fields, refer to my book, Healthy Home, Healthy Family. Very useful guide for your clients so they can navigate their way through understanding the simple tips on how to create a healthy home. Of course, we're the founder of the Abode cleaning product range for people with chemical sensitivities. And of course, the college creates nationally accredited training in feng shui and building biology. If you have any questions about electromagnetic fields, don't hesitate to pick up your corded phone and ring me. Thank you.